Like I said, I want to share something that God put on my heart for you that I've really been feeling, something that God's really been reminding me in this time of COVID-19 and everything that's involved with it. You know, how many of you know it's been a crazy time, you know? And so God's really put something on my heart, and it's so simple. It's just one verse. Romans 8:28. It says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose." You see, we're living in scary times right now. I mean, let's get real. You know, there's people that are getting sick. There's people losing their jobs, man. There's people dying and losing loved ones. And no doubt, our world has every reason to be scared, to be fearful. But what's so good about our God is that we don't have to be that way. How many of you know that we don't wage war like the world does? We have a God on our side that we can trust in, that we know at the end of the day, this verse is true, that he will work all things for the good of those who love him. That means we don't have to live in fear. And one of my favorite sayings in the entire world is one that we just sang on our worship set. It's, he takes what the enemy meant for evil and he turns it for good. Come on, how many of you know that is savage? Right? In fact, let me go ahead and give you the title for today's message. Savage Jesus. Come on, Savage Jesus. I know it ain't original. I know Elevation's used it and other churches have used it, but I'm using it tonight because it is so true. Jesus is savage, man. Think about it. Satan is in there and he's in his evil lair or wherever he hangs out. And, you know, he's like scheming. He's like, I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do. I got a plan. And he gets this plan in place. He's like, yo, this is the perfect plan. He's talking to his little minions like, yo, this is the perfect plan. And he puts a plan in place that he believes is going to take you out. And he does it. It moves. And hey, guess what? Sometimes it does take you out. But the savage thing is that Jesus takes that very thing that meant to take you out and he uses it for your good and for his glory. Come on. He meant to take one person out, but instead, God is going to use that one person to literally change hundreds and thousands of lives because we serve a God, come on, that takes what the enemy meant for evil and turns it for good. Come on, I wonder if you've ever been this. I wonder if you can attest to what I'm saying right now. I wonder if there's anybody watching online that maybe you were once addicted to drugs, but maybe you are years sober now, and the very thing that God meant, that God is using to exalt other people and to get other people free is the very thing that Satan meant to take you out. Come on. Satan thought that you losing your virginity was going to be the thing that took you out, but God is going to use you to speak to people about purity and about moving forward. Come on. I wonder if anybody has experienced something that Satan thought was going to take you out, but God is going to use that very thing to impact thousands of lives because he's savage, y'all. He's savage. Let me show you this in Scripture. Go ahead and turn to Genesis chapter 50. Genesis chapter 50. Maybe you've heard this story before. It's a pretty common story. It's the story of Joseph. You know, you may have heard it, or maybe you perhaps have seen the movie Prince of Egypt, right? It's kind of a popular movie and a popular story. And so Joseph was one of 13 kids. 13 kids. How many of you know that there was probably a social quarantine back in Joseph's parents' day? Right? Like they had nothing better to do than have 13 kids. That sounds horrible. But he was one of 13 kids. And in fact, he was the favorite. He was the favorite of all the kids. His dad loved him more than any of his brothers. And that made his brothers jealous. That made his brothers not like him. And they literally sold him into slavery. Come on, I don't know how bad your 2020 has been so far, but I don't think any of y'all are in slavery. That sounds pretty bad if your brothers sell you into slavery. So his brothers sell him into slavery, and he gets put in prison, and man, it's rough. Every time that he thinks he's going to be exalted, he gets taken back down, and Satan's pushing him back down. And even Pharaoh, who's in charge of all of Egypt, Pharaoh's wife comes to Joseph, and she's like flirting with him and trying to get him to sleep with her, and he's rejecting her. And then she goes back and tells the whole world that he came after her, and it's just this whole mess of Joseph. He just can't get a break. But then finally, for a series of events, he stayed faithful. He stayed the course. And after a series of events, God exalted him to second in command over all of Egypt, right? There was Pharaoh, And then there was Joseph. Come on. That's taking what the enemy meant for evil and turning it for good, right? He was second in command. And what happened was there was a famine in Egypt. And so everybody was coming to the capital and to the Pharaoh, and they were begging for food, and they were giving them food and water so that they could survive and make it another day. And Joseph's brothers are struggling. His family's struggling. They need food. And so Joseph's brothers go to the Pharaoh, and what they don't know is that Joseph is second in command. So when they get there, they're like, yo, this is awkward, but could you give me some food? Right? So they have to literally go to their brother that they sold into slavery, and to their shock, he is now second in command, and they are literally begging him for food so that they could survive another day. And that's where I want to pick up in Genesis chapter 50, verses 18 through 21. It says, then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, come on, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So literally, he's sold into slavery by his brothers. And his very brothers that sold him into slavery, they meant that for harm. But now, God is using it full circle. His brothers are coming back to him, and now Joseph gets to be the one that gives his family food and gives them enough to survive. His family could quite possibly have perished if God wouldn't have taken this and turned it for good. And here's what I want you to understand about this text. His brothers meant evil. Notice it didn't say that God meant evil, right? God did not sell Joseph into slavery. His brothers did. Let me just make this clear. Let me make this relevant to where we are right now in our society. This may mess up some people's theology. God did not cause the coronavirus. Come on. God did not cause this virus, but guess what? He's going to use it. And he's going to turn it around, and he's going to use it for his good, and he's going to use it for his glory. Come on, I don't know if you've been afraid. I don't know if you thought that God was judging us or that God was punishing us. God did not cause this virus to happen, but he is going to use it for his glory and for his good. I love the way that Max Lucado puts it in his quote. He says, in God's hands, intended evil becomes eventual good. I love that. In God's hands, intended evil becomes eventual good. So what are you saying, man? I'm saying this thing does not have to take you out. Come on. This thing, in fact, I believe that this whole situation right now that we're going through in our world can actually make us stronger. Come on, I think right now that we should make a decision that when this thing passes, and listen to me, friend, this too shall pass. It ain't gonna take us out. We're gonna be all right. We're gonna make it. And I think right now we should make a decision right now on this live stream that when this thing passes, when we're on the other side of this virus, that we are going to be stronger than ever before, that we are going to be freer than we've ever been before. Come on, we're going to be closer to God. We're going to be closer to each other. We are going to be great. We're going to be strong because what the enemy meant to take us out, come on, he's only going to make us stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you strong. That's not in my notes. I just felt like singing that. All right, so here's the thing. Here's the thing. For God to turn this around for good, you got to make a decision. You've got to allow God to turn this for good. Come on, look at the story of Joseph. There were decisions that he had to make. Pharaoh's wife was coming to him, trying to seduce him, and he very easily could have given in to that temptation, right? He could have said yes, and maybe nobody would have found out, but he stayed true to God. He stayed faithful. He knew that he had to make some decisions in order for God to be able to turn this thing around. God needs your cooperation with this thing. So let's get real practical. I want to say 6 ways of how we can make the best out of a bad situation. 6 ways in these next few weeks when we're going through this. Here are 6 things that we can all do that will allow God to turn this and make us stronger, make us better on the other side. 6 things. Number 1, we need to empower empathy. We need to empower empathy. Hey, listen to me. Nothing good will come from this situation if you don't empower empathy, right? Because at the end of the day, people are dying, man. People are sick. People are losing their jobs. Hey, this is a real thing, and we need to have empathy for people. We need to understand and walk with people through this thing. Focusing on the good does not mean ignoring the bad, right? I can simultaneously acknowledge that something bad is happening while also trying to make it a good thing, trying to make it a positive thing. And I wanted to start here because if we just focus on ourselves in this situation, if we just look at this situation like, ooh, this is actually a good thing. I get a little vacation. There's going to be so much good that comes out of it. Hey, if we are only focusing on that, we are literally spitting in the face of people who are suffering right now. All over the world, they're suffering. And they need us to be empathetic. They don't want to see us, just delighting in our glory before we first are empathetic with them. Focusing on the good does not mean ignoring reality. I can acknowledge that this is a negative situation while simultaneously trying to make it a positive one. And I'm not just talking about feeling empathy. Notice what the point was. It wasn't feeling empathy, it was empowering empathy. Because not only do we need to be empathetic towards those who are struggling, but we need to empower others to be empathetic. What does that mean? That means I'm going to take the necessary precautions. I'm going to do all the things that all the experts are saying, right? I'm going to wash my hands. I'm not going to go around high-fiving people. I'm not going to hang out in large groups. Why? Because maybe you don't care. Maybe you're like, who cares if I get this virus? That's great. But you need to first be empathetic about others who may have a worse experience with this than you will. And if we're going around just being loose with this, hey, we need people to know that we're empathetic. And the truth is, if people don't feel that you're empathetic towards them, they're never going to listen to you in the first place. So we need to empower empathy. If we're going to make the most out of a situation, we can't be the ones contributing to making it worse. Come on, right? The church of God, us watching the stream, we should be the most empathetic out of anyone in this country right now. We should be the ones taking the most precautions and saying, not that we're living in fear, but we're being empathetic because we know that this is a real thing and we want to be empathetic. We want to empower that empathy and we want to set the standard for that. So if we're going to allow God to turn this into a good thing, first thing is you've got to empower empathy. Second thing is you need to grow in gratitude. We need to grow in gratitude. 1 Thessalonians 5:18, it says, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. In all circumstances, be grateful. This means in the highs and in the lows, in the valleys and on the mountaintops. This means when the world is healthy and functioning and when the world is in a crisis, we should be grateful. Grateful about, I truly believe that this whole situation, if nothing else, should make us grateful. We ought to be grateful for the jobs that we maybe can't do anymore. We ought to be grateful for the friends that we once could hang out with and now we have to just FaceTime. We should be thankful and grateful for our family members who are healthy still, right? We need to be grateful in everything, grateful that we still have our health, grateful that we have our relationship with God. There's tons of things that we can be grateful for. And if we are just, looking at the pessimistic side of things, we're going to miss an opportunity because we have stuff to be grateful for. And in the time of a storm, in the time of a crisis, that should make us even more grateful than we've ever been before. So grow in that gratitude. Maybe it's not something that comes naturally. You can grow in that. You can exercise that every single day. Grow in gratitude. Number 3, exercise optimism. Exercise optimism. Hey, you may be the most pessimistic person in the entire world. Maybe you're watching this and you're like, bro, you don't know me. I'm literally the most pessimistic person in the world. I'm telling you right now, the world needs you to be optimistic. The world needs you to be optimistic. Not naive, optimistic. Always looking to the positive. Always finding the bright side of things. And believe me, there's going to be a lot of good that will come from this. There's going to be a bright side, right? And if we just focus on the negative, if we're just moping around all day like, hey, this is the apocalypse and, we're all going to die and we're never going to come to church again. And it's like, no. The world doesn't need that, man. The world needs you to be optimistic. The world needs you to exercise that optimism. Let me just read you a verse that will kind of show you what I mean by this. Because I'm talking about exercising optimism, and the way that you do this is by keeping your eyes on Jesus. That there's going to be things all around that are happening that could distract you and that could make you pessimistic. But the one way that you can stay optimistic is to keep your eyes focused on Jesus. Matthew 14, verse 30. Peter is walking on the water with Jesus. He literally steps out of the boat and he's walking on the water. Jesus is walking and he's walking to him. But look what happens in verse 30. But seeing the wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. He took his eyes off Jesus and he focused on the waves and the wind. Listen to me, there's a storm happening right now in our country. There's a storm happening right now in our world. But if we keep our eyes focused on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, we can exercise that optimism because we have somebody standing in the storm with us that if we focus on him, man, I'm telling you, we're going to get through this. But the second that we take our eyes off of him and we focus on the winds and the waves, that's when that pessimism starts to sink in. That's when that fear, that anxiety starts to sink in. But if we stay optimistic, come on, we're going to make it. All right? Number 4. Man, let's cultivate connectivity. Let's cultivate connectivity. The ironic thing about the time that we're living in right now is that we need one another more than ever before. But yet it's harder to be together than ever before. Come on, in the time that we need each other more than we've ever needed each other, it's at the same time, it's the hardest it's ever been to be together. So in that time, we have to be, get this word, intentional. We got to be intentional. Could it be that the one thing that God is trying to teach you in this season is how to be intentional with your friends, how to be intentional with your family, how to be intentional in your relationship with God? Because get this, you can't come to church and let this just happen, right? Like when we come to church, there's loud music, there's people around us, there's a pastor screaming at us, right? Like it's easy to be like, okay, God, I love you. But what are you going to do in your home by yourself with nobody around you? You have to be intentional. You have to be intentional. Could that be the very thing that God's trying to teach you in this season? That when we're on the other side of this, we're going to be so much more intentional with people. Man, I'm speaking to myself because, one thing that I stink at is I stink at keeping in touch with people. Right, when friends move away or our family or whatever, I'm the worst at keeping in touch with them, calling them. But hey, right now, I got no choice, right? So now I have to, and God's going to teach me through this season to be intentional. And I believe that if we cultivate that connectivity, man, we're going to grow closer together. We're going to grow closer to God. And when we get on the other side of this, we're going to be connected like we've never been before. So we got to cultivate connectivity. And number 5, we need to practice prayer. Practice prayer. I love this saying. Prayer is not our last resort. Prayer is our first response. Prayer is not the last thing that we do. Like, okay, I tried finding a new job. I tried to, stay sanitized, right? No, prayer is the first thing that we do when something comes at us. We stop right there in our tracks and we pray because it's our first response. You might be thinking, hey, Grant, why did you say practice prayer? You just trying to be a cool preacher with the double P's? Like, what's up with that? No. I said practice prayer because some of us freaking stink at it, right? Like, I'm talking to myself right now. I tend to stink at prayer, right? Like, I'm good to go if we're reading the Bible, if we're doing ministry, but if I have to sit still in God's presence, man, that's when I struggle the most. So I need to practice that. This is my time right now, more than ever before. I need to be practicing that every single day, spending time with God, spending time in His presence, praying. But not only that, we should be praying for our nation now than ever before. Hey, are you praying for your government? Are you praying for your pastors? Are you praying for your family? Are you praying for those who are suffering? Prayer is our first response to this. We should be praying. We should be on our knees every day praying for our leaders, man. You may disagree with everything that our president does, but right now, man, you should be praying for him. You may disagree with everything Pastor Jeff does, but right now, you should be praying for him, man, because this is unprecedented. None of us have ever gone through this before, and we should be praying that God will give us wisdom. We should be praying for the sick. We should be standing in the gap for people who are struggling. Our vice president said it the other day. He said, hey, we need to get off of our phones and onto our knees. Hey, that is cheesy as heck, but it's so good, right? It's so true because the more time that I spend on my phone, the more that I'm going to be focused on the waves, the more that I'm going to be focused on what's going wrong in the world and everything that we're facing. But if I get on my knees before God and I pray and call out to Him and seek His face, if I practice that prayer, God can move in that situation. We ought to be taking this quarantine and just praying, seeking God, man, more than you've ever before. So, hey, real quick recap. Number 1, empower empathy. Number 2, man, we got to grow in our gratitude. Number 3, let's exercise optimism every single day. 4, let's cultivate connectivity. 5, let's practice prayer. And then lastly, number 6, we need to focus on faith. Focus on faith. Man, maybe you're here today and you've been through some storms in your life. Let's be real. You've been through some stuff in your life. Hey, maybe you're going through a storm right now. Maybe this whole thing going on it's hitting you hard. Man, maybe you've lost your job. Maybe you have a family member that's sick. Man, God forbid, maybe you've even lost a family member. You may be going through a storm right now. And it can be so hard to have faith when you're in the middle of a storm. It can be very difficult. Remember Peter in Matthew chapter 14. Peter was literally walking on the water. Like, not trying to walk. He was already walking on the water. And yet he still did not have the faith enough to focus on Jesus. He still took his eyes off of Jesus and onto the storm, even though he was literally walking on the water. Joseph was in prison for years. Man, every time he thought it was getting better, it got worse. Every time he thought that he was making progress, he went back to the bottom. It's got to be hard, man, when you're in prison. You've just been sold out by your family. You've been literally sold by your brothers. Man, that's got to be hard to stay faithful in that season. But he did. He had faith. He kept on believing. Let me tell you this. Faith does not come naturally. Faith comes with focus. We've got to focus on faith. It's not going to happen naturally. Your natural inclination is going to be to doubt. Your natural inclination is going to be to fear. But we need to focus on faith. We've got to keep our eyes on Jesus. We've got to look our storms in the face. We've got to look our giants in the face. And we've got to choose, no matter what's in front of us, I am going to focus on Jesus. no matter what it looks like. Because the world is giving us a lot to focus on right now. Man, we are literally in, information overload like we've never been before. Everybody's posting content, and a lot of that content is going to get you to focus on fear, going to get you to focus on your failures. It's going to get you to focus on the negative situation around you. It's going to get you to focus on panic. But we have to choose this day. I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on faith. I'm going to focus on God. And I'm going to believe that God will get me through. But I get it. I get that when you're in the middle of the storm, and when you look at your life, you say, dude, there's no way. You have no idea. Maybe you're watching on the other side of the stream and you're thinking, you have no idea what I've been through. If you only knew the cards that I've been dealt, if you only knew the things that I've been, you wouldn't even be saying that right now. You would understand that there's no hope. There's no faith to focus on. And I get that. And maybe, I want to build your faith today. I want to help you focus on that. So maybe what I'm saying right now, maybe it's just words. Maybe what you're hearing, you're like, okay, yeah, that's good. That's Christian jargon, but it's just words to you. Well, I asked a few of my friends to come today and to share more than just words. They're going to share you their lives. They're going to share you their testimony. So I'm going to ask them to come up, and I'm believing that this is going to build your faith, and this is going to help you focus on faith.
So as a teenager, I was actively involved in church, and the devil literally threw me distractions to remove me physically from the church with extracurricular activities and a toxic relationship. But the devil never removed the plan God had for me. After my divorce and multiple mornings of waking up hungover, I decided to go back to my happy place, and now I'm actively involved again here at Crossroads, leading small groups, serving in multiple departments, and also on staff.
I walked, in fact, in these doors right here 8 years ago. Didn't feel like my voice mattered. I couldn't talk in front of a room of people unless I was drunk or high. Felt like everything I had to say was unimportant. But you fast forward 8 years, and here I am standing on a stage, speaking to a camera, knowing our God and knowing my calling is to speak to a generation only by our God. Only by our God. Only by your God.
For most of my life, I experienced a broken heart. People broke my heart. I had pastors who broke my heart, a family that broke my heart, past relationships that broke my heart. And for a long time, the only love that I knew was the love of God through Jesus Christ. And God turned it around for me because he took those broken pieces. He mended my heart back together to where I could love myself, to where I could love others, to where I could love my husband fully and completely. God turned my broken heart into a whole one.
For all my life, I really struggled with knowing what love looked like coming from a male figure in my family. I never really had a strong one that really supported me and showed me love. Me and my dad's relationship was hindered a lot. I didn't really have a relationship with my brother, and thankfully all of that has been redeemed, but it took a lot of heartbreak. It took a lot of time praying and then realizing that God was going to be the one that was going to move in that area. And it bled into my life. It bled into the relationships that I had, where was trying to live up to something that I believed God had for me. But the males that I would encounter wouldn't care. They didn't respect my wishes. They wouldn't honor me or understand me. And it took God saying, I have somebody for you. I have somebody, but in this time, I want you to know that you're enough for me. And God moved in my life, and I sought after him, and I prayed to him, and I'm so thankful for all that he's done in my life. But I had to know that it was only him that was going to be good enough for me. It wasn't going to be a guy or a family member. It was going to be God that needed to come into my heart and move in that area. And he was faithful with what he told me, and he has blessed me with an incredible husband who respects me and honors me and has from the beginning. God did that. God was the one that I knew I needed to be enough for him and that he would be enough for me.
I struggled with insecurity my entire life, looking at myself as not good enough, looking at myself as I'll never measure up. I grew up with low self-esteem. It took me down the route of pornography, of chasing girl after girl, trying to find my identity. And here I am years later on this stage talking to you right now, and God took that very thing, that very brokenness, that very weakness that I struggle with, and now he is using it to make me stronger than ever and to empower other people to be strong and to believe in themselves. Come on, every single one of these people that just talked to you are living, breathing examples of God taking what the enemy meant for evil and turning it around for his good. Come on, if you are here right now and you are watching and you have no faith and you say there's nothing to focus on, there's nothing to believe in, you just heard testimony after testimony, not just words. We're not speaking words to you. We're telling you what God truly did. When you focus on faith, there's nothing that we can go through. Man, every single one of these people, Satan had a plan to take them out. And it's that very plan that God is using right now to exalt them to places they never thought they would ever be.